Welcome to another Whiskey, Games, and Nerd Stuff. And today we are going to actually talk about tariffs. It's been a hot topic of conversation over the last couple weeks, and I have a feeling it's going to be a hot topic in the months to come. So let's go ahead and talk about it. And on the background, you're going to see some gameplay of Friday. Friday is a wonderful solo player game worth checking out. So, first of all, I want to make it clear tariffs are a tax. Plain and simple. Get that, understand that. Tariffs are a tax. Second thing I want to kind of talk about, and the point I want to make is countries do not pay tax. So if you impose a 25% tariff on, say, Canada or Mexico, or if any country puts a tariff on imports from another country, the countries are not paying those tax. So, for example, let's say that there's a 25% tax on imports coming from Canada into the United States. Canada does not pay that tax. Canada will not be paying that 25%. So, importers or the companies that are American owned or doing business in America, they are the ones that are paying that tax. So, yes, there will be a tax. And if it's a tariff of 25% on a specific good, there will be a tariff. So if you have that $100 and that the tariff tax is 25%, you're going to have that $25 charged to that. That $25 is not paid by Canada. And I am going to use the terms importers, manufacturers, and companies kind of interchangeably, but basically it's the company in America, the importer or the retailer or the manufacturer. They are the ones that are paying that tax. It's an American company that's paying that tax. Now, something that you have to ask yourself is what happens when that company pays that 25%? Well, they have a particular choice. They can eat that 25%, or they can pass it along to their consumer or their customer. And then that customer is going to pay that 25%. So if a good is coming into the United States, again, from Canada, Mexico, any country that has a tariff tax, the American company, the American manufacturer, the American retailer, whoever is actually bringing the goods in, they're the ones paying that tax, not the country. That company, which is going to be a company in America, then has a choice to eat that tax, or they can pass it along to their customer. And then down that chain, it's going to be the consumer, you, the listener. You are the one that's ultimately paying for that tax when you purchase that good. In addition, the tariff tax will increase manufacturing costs for American companies making American goods. Because in a lot of situations, the American companies manufacturing American goods need to import components and materials to make said goods. If those goods or materials are coming from Canada and there's a 25% tariff increase on all things coming from Canada, that's going to cost some more. For example, if you're building a house and you need wood, cement, or other materials, or your builder needs those materials and those are imported in, that's going to cost you more money. Auto industry, you're going to see the price of new cars going up. Most people don't understand the intricacies of the supply chain for car manufacturers in the United States. There's parts that come in from Canada. There's parts that come in from Mexico. There's parts that come in from other places. And there's even times when you're going to have parts coming from Canada down to Mexico, back to the US, and all in between. That tariff, each time it crosses a border, is going to come into play. That is going to increase the cost of new automobiles. It's also going to indirectly increase the cost of used cars. Why? Because just like what happened last time is when new cars cost more people buy used cars. When more people buy used cars, there's a demand for those used cars. And when that demand goes up, the price goes up. Also, what people don't understand is your repair bills for all the repair needs for any automobile you have most likely is going to go up. Where do you think those parts come from? And if there is a tariff tax increase on brake pads, on tires, you, on anything that you bring in, that repair bill is going to go up. It's not the countries paying that, it's you, the consumer, paying that. You need to understand that. The other concern about tariffs is it's something that people don't often think about. If and I'm going to use Canada for an example. If we raise tariffs on all products coming from Canada by 25%, they in turn are going to raise tariffs on products that American companies are producing and sending to Canada to get purchased. For example, America, and this is what happened a few years back, if they retaliate and have a 25% tariff tax on our products, most likely what's going to happen is it's going to hit things just like it did. I want to say it was in 2018. American whiskey, Georgia peaches, Florida oranges. What do you think is going to happen to the American whiskey, Kentucky bourbon market when the stuff that gets exported to Canada, there's an additional 25% cost. It's not America that is paying that tariff to Canada. What's happening is it's those companies in Canada that's paying that tariff, meaning the Canadian consumers are going to get charged more to purchase American whiskey. Now, the American companies, the producer distillers, they're not getting that money. The retailer in Canada is. And what do you think is going to happen when Kentucky bourbon goes up by 25% in Canada? And then you've got whiskeys from all across the world. There's going to be a lot of consumers that are going to say, you know what? I'm just going to go with something else. And what you're going to see is this will impact the market for American products. And, American whiskey is one thing. Georgia peaches is another. Florida oranges is another thing that's going to impact that. The other thing is oil. How much oil do we purchase or get in from Canada into the United States? What's going to happen if they decide to throw that into the mix? And it's not just things like whiskey or Georgia peaches or oranges from Florida. I remember reading a story that talked about washers. I want to say it was around 2018 that a tariff was imposed on washers imported in. And what was interesting is, just like we just talked about, the consumer ended up getting charged more for those washers. Well, what happened was they found, interestingly enough, that a washers that were manufactured 100% in America, you would think that what would happen is, oh, hey, these washers that were imported in are going to cost more, so surely the American washers, being cheaper, would sell more. Well, what ended up happening is those companies actually raised their prices to be right within line of what the prices of the imported washers were. So the consumer ended up actually paying more money. And then what happened too was the actual prices for dryers went up as well. Because, how often do people go out there and buy a washer and don't buy a dryer? But because they raised the tariff on imports for washers, the products produced within the United States, those went up too. And that's something that people don't realize. And one of the arguments for raising tariffs, which is a fair argument, is And there's a reason why countries have the tariffs, but part of it is they want to protect a particular industry. Well, and they want to have those jobs that are going to be in the US. So you're going to hear a lot of people that are supporting raising the tariffs say, well, we want to raise the tariffs because it's going to create jobs and have more manufacturing in our country. Well, that's not always the case. It's not going to always create more jobs. And then sometimes it can have the reverse effect. And it's something that you need to look into yourself. You need to do the research and know when you're advocating for raising tariffs across the board, what are the long term consequences? And often the case is the consumer. And in this case, if we're talking tariffs in America, if we raise tariffs on Canadian products that are imported, Mexican products that are imported, if they do it, just tariffs across the board, like we hear them talking about, or you hear in the news, at the end of the day, the American consumer will pay more. And if you're paying more for the products that you buy every day, you're going to have less disposable income. If you have less disposable income, you're going to buy less things. And if you're buying less things, then there's less demand for those things, which means as that continues and feeds itself, there's going to be less need for jobs producing those things. If there's less demand for widgets, you're not going to need the same amount of workforce to produce said widgets. And, I want to make it clear, I'm not an economist, I'm not a financial advisor, and none of this should be taken as financial advice. I'm just somebody who likes whiskey, games, nerd stuff, has a YouTube channel that likes to talk about this, and this is a good conversation. But this is one of those things where I'd highly encourage anybody listening, do your own research, look into it, see what's happened through the course of the last 5, 10, 15, 25 years when we've raised tariffs, when there's been tariff wars, and how that's come into effect. The other thing that you got to keep in mind, too, is, why do countries impose tariffs? Part of that is to exert influence. Part of that is to raise revenue. Part of it is to protect a competitive advantage of a specific industry. And part of it is, let's be honest, it's politics. In it is what it is. But this is something that you need to look into, and see. Again, I'll go back to the American whiskey and Kentucky bourbon. If things play out and we end up getting a retaliation, or they tit for tat kind of thing, and the cost of American whiskey, Kentucky bourbon going into a certain country is 25% more, how is that going to impact the demand for that down the road? These are things that we need to ask. These are neat things we need to look at. And also, who is going to ultimately eat this? It's usually the consumer. Please, if you have examples or specific industries or specific products that you would like to kind of talk about in the comment section, would love to hear that. And also, I would say this: take a look at, make a list in the comment section of stuff that you buy day to day on an average basis. Do some research and see where those products come from. Are they, and then where are they imported from? And then look at what the prices are now. And then if it ends up being in one of these countries that the tariffs do go up, check out what those prices are a month later. And I would love to hear in the comment section if they went up or went down, and what your thoughts are on that. What are the prices of cars going to be now? What are the prices of eggs now? What are they going to be later? What are the prices of avocados now? Again, those goods, I like whiskey. I like mezcal. So mezcal is made in Mexico. If they put a 25% tariff on mezcal coming in, everything that I buy is going to cost more. The consumer will pay more. Mexico is not paying that. I'm paying that. Now, I might buy less mezcal, and you know who that hurts? That hurts your local American liquor store, that hurts your American distributor, and yeah, there's going to be less in demand, and that's going to affect some of the companies that are owned in Mexico. But what people need to remember, especially you stockholders out there, is some of these international companies, are publicly traded companies. So how is that going to impact the financials of various companies? It's something you need to look into. So one of the things I want to kind of leave this with is do your own research. You're going to see things depending on which news outlets you watch, what you read. And obviously, politics being what it is, you're going to have people trying to spin things both ways. Do your own research. Look into this and see how it's going to impact you personally. Look into it, see how it's going to impact the company you work for. Look into it and see if you own a company, how is it going to affect your employees? How is it going to affect your customers? How is it going to affect your supply lines? This is something that I would suggest that you look into, and then as you're looking into this, ask the questions. How is this going to impact things now, a month from now, 2 months from now, 3 months from now? And I'll kind of close with a story that I had talked to a friend that I know who's a small business owner in the U.S. He has an order on hand, and it's roughly about $30,000. It's a little bit more, but we're just going to say it's $30,000. So he has goods that are coming in from Mexico that's roughly $30,000, and he's waiting to get the funds so he can pay for those goods. But he didn't want to order them for a couple months until the cash came in because he wanted to extend credit. Here's the dilemma: is if the tax goes up roughly that 25%, on that $30,000 worth of product, and let's say those 25% tariff comes in at February 1st, that means instead of that product, him coming up with $30,000, he now has to come up with an additional 7,500. If it was a $10,000 product, in product that he was having to order for, now it's going to cost him 2,500 more. So he's going to be out $7,500 more when he orders this stuff. And the reason he's not ordering it, or having it manufactured in the U.S. Is one, it's just the specific things that he's getting, and two is it still ultimately may be cheaper in the long run from a manufacturing cost, but right now he already has those orders in place. He's already got somebody that he's comfortable with who's making the product. So now it's a situation where he's going to be out that money. So he personally, as that business owner, needs to make that decision. Does he raise the prices for his products and pass it along to his customers? Or does he eat that profit? If he eats that profit, he's got less money that's going to go to his employees. That's less money for raises, for bonuses, for various incentives. And it could be also the difference between does he hire somebody or not, or a part-timer. So these are things that you need to consider: is what are the long-term ramifications? Now, sure, you're going to have some people who will say, but wait a minute, maybe this will initiate a situation or create a situation where he can find a company in the US that will produce the specific goods that he needs, and then wouldn't have to worry about that increased cost. It's not that simple. It may cost, and from my conversation with him, it does cost a lot more to have this produced in the US, especially at scale. Two, this particular product, most of the materials would be imported into the U.S. anyway for those to be made, and that's something that we've got to remember. A lot of the materials and a lot of the components, even for those goods manufactured in the U.S., are imported from other countries, and this is not a left issue. This is not a right issue. This is just a situation of, ultimately, as I'm sipping on a what is this? A bourbon. So actually, this is a Kentucky bourbon, so this wouldn't have to affect. But if I was sipping on the Suntory that I'm looking at, or if I'm sipping one of the some of this Oaxaca mezcal, that's going to cost me more money. And this is one of those things where you as the person, you as the viewer, you as the listener, I just implore you to do some research, look at various sources, spend some time looking to see how this will impact you personally, how this will impact the company you work for, and what I mentioned before. I do really appreciate everybody taking the time to listen to this. I know I kind of ramble on this. I would like to see what your thoughts are on. Is this something that you liked watching, just a random gameplay in the background while I talk about a specific topic? If so, this is something I can continue to do on a weekly basis, and we'll just pick some topics at random. And if you have some specific topics that you would just like some guy who enjoys whiskey games and nerd stuff to ramble on about, please feel free to make a comment in the comment section. Would love to hear people's comments and feedbacks in there. I just ask everybody to be respectful. And until next time, folks, cheers.